No one in the restaurant was eating anymore. Forks hovered in the air, glasses stopped halfway to lips. Even the piano player had quietly stopped playing. Because at the center of the room, a man was being beaten. Hard. The first punch landed so violently it knocked him straight into a marble pillar. The crack echoed through the luxury restaurant like a gunshot. But no one helped him. Not the wealthy guests pretending not to watch, not the waiters frozen beside their tables, not even the bodyguards stationed around the room. Because everyone knew who was sitting nearby. Sebastian Moretti, the most feared Mafia boss in the city. And right now, the violence was happening only a few feet away from him. The victim gasped as another fist slammed into his ribs. "Please," he wheezed. The attacker grabbed his collar and lifted him halfway off the ground. "You should have thought about that before you stole from us." Another punch. Blood sprayed across the polished floor. Someone near the back quietly whispered, "Oh my God." But no one moved, because the most terrifying thing in the room wasn't the violence. It was the man who hadn't reacted at all. Sebastian Moretti sat calmly at the center table, perfectly still. His expensive black suit looked untouched by the chaos around him. One hand rested loosely beside a glass of whiskey. The other tapped slowly against the table. Once, twice. Like the entire scene bored him. The attacker glanced toward him. "Boss," he said, slightly out of breath. "He says he'll pay it back." The bleeding man quickly nodded. "I swear, just give me time." Sebastian didn't answer. He didn't even look at the man begging for his life. For several seconds, the only sound in the restaurant was the victim's ragged breathing. Then Sebastian slowly lifted his eyes, cold, detached. "Did I ask for excuses?" The attacker shook his head quickly. "No, boss." Sebastian picked up his whiskey, took a slow sip, then said something that made half the room stop breathing. "Then why is he still talking?" The meaning was clear. Finish it. Immediately. The attacker turned back toward the victim. The man began crying openly now. "No, please, I have a daughter." His words were cut off as the attacker raised his fist again. People looked away. One woman covered her mouth. Another guest quietly stood, clearly planning to leave before things got worse. Because everyone knew how this would end. But then, a quiet voice spoke from across the room. "Stop." The single word felt like a stone thrown into deep water. Ripples of shock spread instantly. The attacker froze. Slowly, heads began turning. Because the voice hadn't come from a guest. It came from a maid. She stood near the service station holding a silver tray. Her uniform was plain, simple, almost invisible among the wealthy crowd. Her name tag read Elena, and somehow, she had just told a Mafia executioner to stop. The attacker stared at her in disbelief. "Did you just speak to me?" Elena's hands trembled slightly around the tray. Fear flashed across her face. Everyone expected her to back down. Most people would have. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped forward. One step, then another. Her voice steadied. "You're going to kill him." The attacker gave a short laugh. That's usually what happens. Some guests began quietly moving toward the exits, because interfering in Mafia business never ended well. But Elena didn't stop walking. She looked at the man bleeding on the floor, Then she looked at Sebastian, really looked at him. And something about the way she did it was different. Not fear, not hatred, just honesty. "You already proved your point," she said quietly. "He's not fighting back anymore." The restaurant grew colder. One of Sebastian's bodyguards shifted slightly, but Sebastian himself still hadn't reacted, which somehow made the moment even more terrifying. The attacker smirked. "You think you understand how this works?" "No," Elena admitted softly. "But I understand what happens if you kill him here." Now the attacker looked curious. "And what's that?" Elena glanced around the room, at the frightened guests, at the witnesses, at the phone slowly starting to appear. "The police will come," she said simply. The attacker snorted. "Boss doesn't care about police." Elena shook her head slightly. "No," she said, "but bosses care about attention." And that's when it happened. For the first time since the violence started, Sebastian Moretti moved. Just slightly. His fingers tapped once against the table. The tiny sound echoed louder than the punches. Every man in the room straightened immediately. Then Sebastian slowly lifted his eyes and looked directly at her. Dark, sharp, dangerous. Elena suddenly realized what she had done. Her heart skipped, because Sebastian wasn't looking at her with anger. He wasn't looking at her like an annoyance. He was studying her, like something unexpected. The attacker turned nervously. "Boss?" Sebastian didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed locked on Elena. Then he said one word. "Stop." The entire room froze. The attacker instantly stepped back. The bleeding man collapsed to the floor in relief. But no one was looking at him anymore, because something far more dangerous had just happened. Sebastian Moretti slowly stood and walked toward the maid who had just interrupted his world. And for the first time in years, something had caught his attention. The entire restaurant held its breath. Sebastian Moretti stopped just inches in front of Elena. Up close, he was far more intimidating than she expected. He was taller than everyone else in the room, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than a year of her salary. A faint scar cut across his jawline, giving his calm expression something dangerous. Elena suddenly became aware of how quiet the room had become. Dozens of people were watching. No one dared speak. Because when Sebastian Moretti stood, the world usually listened. "You interrupted my business," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the room like a command. Elena's heart pounded violently in her chest. Every instinct told her to apologize, to step back, to disappear. But something inside her refused to. "Yes," she said. A quiet wave of shock moved through the guests. One of the attackers shifted uncomfortably. Most people begged when Sebastian confronted them. She had just agreed with him. Sebastian studied her face. Not quickly, not casually, carefully. Like he was examining something valuable or dangerous. "You're not afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena hesitated. Then she answered honestly. "I am." A faint murmur spread through the room. That wasn't the answer anyone expected. Sebastian tilted his head slightly. Then why did you interfere? Elena glanced briefly at the man still lying on the floor. Blood stained the carpet beneath him. He would have died. One of Sebastian's men scoffed. That was the idea. But Elena looked back at Sebastian, ignoring the comment. And it would have happened in front of 50 witnesses, she added quietly. The room went silent again. Sebastian's eyes narrowed slightly. You think you saved me from a problem. I think I stopped you from creating a bigger one. A dangerous smile flickered briefly across his face. Most people trembled under his gaze. This woman was correcting him, in public. One of the bodyguards leaned closer. Boss, want us to remove her? The restaurant suddenly felt colder. Elena's stomach twisted. This was the moment she would regret everything. But Sebastian didn't even look at the guard. Instead, he asked Elena another question. What's your name? The entire room stiffened because Sebastian Moretti never asked names. He gave orders. Elena swallowed. Elena. He repeated it slowly. Elena. The way he said it made her name sound different, important, like he was memorizing it. Behind them, the injured man groaned softly. Sebastian finally glanced down at him, then back at Elena. You care about strangers. It sounded almost like an accusation. Elena shrugged slightly. Someone should. Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke to Sebastian like this, ever. Sebastian stepped slightly closer. Now she could feel the heat of his presence. You understand who I am? Yes. And you still told my men to stop? Yes. The quiet tension between them felt electric. One of the attackers whispered to another guard. Is she crazy? But Sebastian wasn't angry. If anything, he looked intrigued. You work here? He asked. Elena nodded. Cleaning staff. Sebastian's eyes flicked briefly toward the tray she still held, then back to her. How long? 2 months. Pay good? She almost laughed. No. That faint smile appeared again. Sebastian turned slightly toward the room, toward the terrified guests watching every second. Then he did something no one expected. He snapped his fingers once. Immediately, one of his men stepped forward. Yes, boss? Sebastian gestured toward the bleeding man on the floor. Take him to a hospital. The attacker blinked. But boss... Sebastian's eyes shifted, just slightly. That was enough. Yes, boss, the man said quickly. 2 guards rushed forward and lifted the injured man. Within seconds, they were dragging him toward the exit. The restaurant slowly started breathing again, but Sebastian hadn't moved. His attention remained fixed on Elena. You changed the ending tonight, he said quietly. Elena didn't know what to say. Neither did anyone else. Then Sebastian said something that made the entire room freeze again. From now on, he said calmly, you work for me. For a moment, Elena thought she had heard him wrong. The restaurant was still silent. Every guest, every waiter, every guard, all of them stared at Sebastian Moretti like they were waiting for him to say he was joking. But Sebastian never joked. Elena blinked slowly. What? You work for me now, Sebastian repeated calmly. His tone made it sound less like an offer and more like gravity, something inevitable. Elena shook her head slightly. I already work here. Sebastian glanced around the restaurant once. His gaze swept across the marble floors, the velvet chairs, the nervous manager standing near the entrance. Then he looked back at her. "No," he said simply. "You clean here." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The difference between those two words felt enormous. Elena tightened her grip on the silver tray. "That's still a job." Sebastian studied her again. There was no mockery in his expression, only curiosity. "Do you like it?" She hesitated. The truth slipped out before she could stop it. "No." Sebastian nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. Then he turned his head slightly. "Marco?" One of the men near the entrance immediately stepped forward. "Yes, boss." "How much does this place pay their cleaning staff?" The restaurant manager suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear. Marco glanced toward him. The man stuttered nervously. Around 800 a month?" Sebastian looked back at Elena. "That explains the shoes." Elena blinked. "My shoes?" Sebastian lowered his gaze briefly. The worn soles, the small tear near the side, things no one else in the room had noticed or cared about. "You work hard," he said quietly. "You help strangers." "You speak the truth." Then he said something that made several guests quietly gasp. "You don't belong cleaning floors." Elena felt heat rise in her face. She wasn't used to being noticed, especially not by someone like him. "What would I do for you?" she asked carefully. The question seemed to amuse him. "You'd learn." "That's not an answer." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "I like that you question things." Behind him, one of his men muttered under his breath. Sebastian heard it instantly. His head turned. The room froze. "Yes," he said calmly. The man immediately straightened. "Nothing, boss." Sebastian held his gaze for a few seconds longer, then turned back to Elena. "You'd work with my staff," he said, "organizing things, managing things." Elena raised an eyebrow. "That sounds vague." "It is. And dangerous." "That too." The honesty surprised her. "Why me?" she asked. This time, Sebastian didn't answer immediately. His eyes held hers, longer than before. Then he said quietly, "Because you didn't ask who I was." Elena frowned slightly. "Everyone knows who you are." "Yes," he said, "but you spoke to me like I was just a man." The tension in the room thickened. Sebastian took a step closer. Not threatening, but close enough that she could hear his breathing. "Do you know how rare that is?" Elena shrugged lightly. "I was trying to stop someone from dying." "Exactly." Something unreadable flickered behind his eyes. "Most people only see my power," he said. "You saw the situation." Elena didn't know what to say to that. Sebastian reached into his jacket. Several guards tensed instantly, but he only pulled out a black card. He placed it gently on the tray she was still holding. Heavy, matte black, no logo, just a number. "My driver will pick you up tomorrow morning," he said. Elena stared at the card. "And if I say no?" For the first time since the night began, Sebastian smiled fully, slow, confident, dangerous. "You won't." Then he leaned slightly closer and added quietly, "Because tomorrow, your life changes." Elena woke before dawn. The city was quiet, fog rolling over narrow streets as if the world itself was holding its breath. A sleek black car waited at the curb, its engine idling like a predator. She gripped the black card in her hand, heavy, cold, real. Her heart raced, but her feet moved anyway. Fear had never been enough to stop her before, and it wouldn't start now. The driver opened the rear door without a word. She slid in, and the door shut with a soft click that sounded like a sentence being passed. The city blurred past the tinted windows. Elena didn't speak. She didn't know what to ask. After 20 minutes, the car stopped in front of a massive building. Marble floors, black steel, dark glass. No one was allowed in without Sebastian's word. The driver gestured. "Go on. Boss will see you shortly." Elena's stomach twisted. Every step toward the elevator echoed in the cavernous lobby. She felt exposed, small. The elevator doors opened and a guard nodded. "Boss is expecting you." Her pulse doubled. She followed the hallway until it ended at a door slightly ajar. Inside, Sebastian waited. As always, he looked calm, impossibly calm. Hands behind his back, eyes sharp, reading her as if she were glass. "Good morning," he said, voice even, but it carried authority. Elena swallowed. "Good morning." He gestured to a chair. She hesitated. He didn't ask twice. She sat. "First lesson," he said, stepping closer. "You survive by seeing what others don't. You act when others freeze. You speak when others obey." Elena listened, her nerves taut. "Do you understand?" he asked. "I think so," she said. He didn't answer immediately. He walked around her slowly, like he was inspecting a diamond or a threat. "Think carefully," he said finally. "This isn't a game. Every choice you make has consequences. My world is dangerous." "I can handle danger," Elena said. Her voice didn't waver. A faint smirk touched his lips. "Good. Most can't. Most run or beg. You step in front of a punch." She stared at him. She didn't know why that mattered so much, but she sensed it did. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "You'll work with my staff. Observe. Learn to anticipate. Everyone has a weakness. Every plan has a crack. You find them. You exploit them." Elena's mind raced. She didn't know how she would do all that, but she also knew she couldn't back down now. Sebastian's gaze locked on hers, intense, piercing. His presence pressed against her chest like a physical weight. "You already impressed me," he said quietly. "Tonight, you'll see the difference between fear and control, between power and chaos." The words felt like both a promise and a threat. Before she could respond, he turned to a side table. A folded black folder lay there. He opened it, revealing documents, photos, and a map of the city. "This is your first assignment," he said. "Understand it. Know it. Live it. Fail, and someone else will die because of you." Elena's stomach churned. She had stepped into his world. There was no turning back. Sebastian watched her, expression unreadable, but the intensity in his eyes told her one thing clearly. He was already judging her, and she had already passed the first test. The night was heavy with rain, but inside Sebastian Moretti's penthouse, the storm felt distant. Elena stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights blur in streaks of orange and gray. Her hand still held the black card, now familiar, now terrifying. Every heartbeat reminded her that nothing in this world came without risk. Sebastian appeared silently behind her. She hadn't heard him enter. That was the way he moved, like shadow and storm wrapped into a single man. You stayed, he said softly, almost a statement, not a question. Elena swallowed. I didn't leave. He didn't comment on her words. Instead, he circled her slowly, his presence pressing against her senses, making the air feel thinner. You've learned faster than I expected, he said finally, voice calm, precise. Most people crumble. They beg, they lie, they vanish. I've always known how to survive, Elena said. Her voice didn't waver. She had learned that power could kill silently, and Sebastian Moretti's power was deadly. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel his warmth despite the cold storm outside. But survival isn't enough. You need to understand control. You need to understand fear and how to bend it without breaking it. Elena lifted her chin. I want to learn. His smile was slow, unreadable, dangerous. Good, because from tonight, the world will bend around you, and I will be watching. The first test came immediately. A call from the city office flashed on his phone. Elena had watched him work, but now it was her turn. She had to organize the movements, the staff, the contacts, coordinate a deal that could either make Sebastian's empire untouchable or crumble it entirely. Every choice mattered. Every hesitation could cost lives. She breathed deeply. Then she acted. Orders were given, verified, and executed, all under her direction, all under his silent observation. After hours, when the operation concluded without a single mistake, she finally allowed herself to exhale. Sebastian was still standing behind her, watching, waiting. You were fearless, he said. You didn't panic. You took control, and you did it flawlessly. Elena turned slowly. The exhaustion and adrenaline in her veins made her knees weak. He silenced her with a gesture. No one does what you did tonight. Not my men, not anyone else. You. His dark eyes narrowed slightly. You are the first person who sees me, truly sees me, and still acts without fear. The words hit her like a physical blow. Not fear, not even admiration. Something else. Something rare. Something dangerous. He stepped closer, so close that she could feel the edge of his suit brush against her arm. His hand hovered near hers, but didn't touch. Control, always control. Power, always measured. Yet, a softness lingered, just a whisper. You changed the rules, he said quietly, and now the choice is mine. Elena swallowed, understanding immediately what he meant. Sebastian extended his hand, a simple gesture, but in it lay promise and peril, danger and obsession. She hesitated, then took it. Instantly the world shifted. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a statement. He chose her, publicly, privately, irrevocably. The city's most feared man had focused all his power, all his attention, on her alone, and everyone else disappeared into irrelevance. You understand what this means? He asked, voice low, sharp, intimate. Yes, she said, her chest tightened. I understand. A faint smile tugged at his lips. Then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath. Good, he whispered, because from now on, no one touches you. No one threatens you. You are mine to protect, mine to challenge, and mine to push to the edge. And the edge... He paused, eyes glinting. is where you'll learn just how dangerous this world really is. Elena's heart raced. Excitement, fear, and desire all collided. She had survived the first punch. She had survived the storm. And now she was standing at the center of a new storm, hand in hand with the most dangerous man in the city. Sebastian released her hand slowly, letting her feel the weight of the moment. His gaze lingered on her, and for the first time, it wasn't just fear or dominance, it was obsession. Pure, fixated, undeniable. Then, without warning, he leaned slightly closer again and whispered into her ear, "No one will ever see you like I do. You are mine, chosen. Remember that." The rain outside finally let up, but inside the penthouse, the storm had just begun. Elena knew, with terrifying clarity, that nothing would ever be the same again. And for the first time, she didn't want it to be.